So happy to be here, and I will speak about a debate that has been going on in the consciousness, about the structure of consciousness in the last 10 years or so. And I think I am on the minority on this view, but perhaps Victor or Rafi might support me a bit. And I will try here to defend a moderate view of what is called the overflow, and perhaps this moderate view might bring us some way in between towards a resolution of this debate. So let me start with a distinction between two aspects of consciousness. The central defining aspect of consciousness is its phenomenality, how it feels like. And that's how we usually describe consciousness when we study philosophy. But there is another aspect, which is access related to the global workspace, to working memory, and to report. And usually, those two aspects go together. When we feel something, we know to say we do. But it is not obvious that they need to go together. For example, conceptually, we can think of a system that has access consciousness without feeling anything, say a robot, which can report on objects shown to it, and which might have a functional analog of our working memory, but doesn't experience anything. And perhaps what Ned Block suggested is that even with us, while usually the two things go together, there might be situations when they don't. And in particular, the idea of the overflow is that the phenomenal consciousness is richer than what we can report. Report is limited by attentional capacities, by working memory capacities, which we have characterized quite well in psychology to be around 3-4. While perceptual experience is very rich, so say we look at this picture, we have a very rich experience of what we see, but according to the opposed view, which was being proposed by many people like Daniel Dennett, in fact, when we look at such a picture, what we do experience at any moment is something like that. So wherever we attend, we see in high detail, rest is very blurred, and then we shift attention from one place to another. Now, there are arguments and data favoring each approach, but let me start with a really difficult methodological problem for this overflow view. How can we find out whether there can be conscious experience, P, without the cognitive accessibility, A, required for reporting this conscious experience, since any evidence would have to derive from reports that themselves derive from such cognitive access? So if that is true, then it seems to make overflow untestable. Now, I agree it is a very difficult problem, but what I will try to convince you is that we, by using multiple methods and converging evidence, we might be able to probe a bit and to make some progress despite this severe problem. So let me start with the support for overflow that Ned Block has initially used to support his idea, and it comes from an experiment which is a textbook experiment in psychology, Sperling's paradigm. So what we know, I'm sure that you all know the Sperling experiment, but what it shows, it presents people with arrays like those of letters for brief intervals, 100 to 300 milliseconds. If people are asked to report whatever they remember, they can report about 3 letters. But we know that they have access to much more information, because if a post cue is presented after display has disappeared, the people can report much more. Basically, they can report almost anything, or at least about 12 items from such a display. And that has been called iconic memory, and it's a trace which decays within about half a second or so. And according to Sperling, at least how Sperling presented this idea, iconic memory is conscious until it fades. And that is supported by the introspection of the subjects who said, well, I see more elements than I could report. But there is an alternative interpretation to this, which is, and that will be the interpretation of what is called the impoverished awareness view, that what we actually see in such a case, we, let's say, focus attention on the first row, we see those letters in detail, we really see 3-4 letters, but the rest of the letters we don't really see. We maybe see some fragments, or we have some generic letter-like experience, and that's it. So how can we distinguish about that? Let me, and in addition, okay, so here is the objection to the overflow for this data is that before a Q is presented, what we have is a high-resolution unconscious representation of all letters. We have conscious access to the letters that we focally attend, and we have this generic phenomenal state of letter-like objects. And it is a Q which transfers one of those letters from an unconscious state to a conscious state. And in fact, yeah, we are left with this introspection, and some people are even doubting this introspection, while that is what Sperling reported. And when speaking with people, some of them, some researchers have told me, well, why should we trust this introspection? Even it's not right, even as an introspection. So we started testing this introspection in an experiment. So in this study, we present people a race of 9 letters, 300 milliseconds. We just ask them to report whatever they remember at the end, and they can report about 3 letters out of the 9. And then we do something else. At the end, after they did practice with this race, we tell them, listen, there are 2 theories. One theory says that people in such a race, the reason they report 3 letters because they can see only 3 letters distinctly, while the other letters they have some generic but not distinct experience. But there is another theory saying that in fact people do see much more than 3-4 letters distinctly, and they fade. And now I will show you a number of such displays. You don't have to report anything, just look and try to see how many letters you think that you experience distinctly. So it's an introspection study, and what people report goes between 4 and 9. 9 is the maximum they could, because those all the letters we have. Nobody reports definitely less than 4. So it's interesting, the average is around 6, a bit more. And I think it shows that, at least introspectively, people have an experience of seeing more than the capacity of working memory. But again, why should we trust this introspection? There are good reasons not to trust it. And in another study, what I want to show now is a study in which we try to probe some kind of conscious awareness in a Sperling-like paradigm of not letters, because again, with letters there is this issue that perhaps attention is needed to bind the features of a letters, but with some kind of color primitives, in this case, colors. So the experiment went as follows. We have a race of 6x4 color letters, and we present a cue, a pre-cue, which tells people that they should pay attention to the letters on this row, because then they will be probed on one of them. Their task at the beginning, and they do multiple blocks on this task until performance reaches an asymptotic level, is to report the letter at the cued, this letter. So in this case, they have to report R. They are not asked anything about the colors. and they do many such blocks. After that, we introduced a secondary task, which asks people, if you see colors, you have to make a judgment. After you report the letter, you have to make a judgment about if there was high or low color diversity in this display. Let me explain what color diversity is. So we choose the colors from this color wheel, and we have one condition, for example here, in which the colors are chosen from 1/3 of the wheel. It can be in all kind of orientations, but it's 1/3 of the wheel. And we have another condition in which the colors are chosen from all around the wheel, and people are not asked what's the average color, but they are asked whether there is high or low diversity. It is an analog of variance. And the results are the following. What we find is the observers, when on the primary task, they can report about 3 letters, consistent with the visual working memory capacity. And they have the same report in the divided attention task, because we emphasize that the letter task is an important one. They do it first, they get reward on it, while the color task is subjective, they get no reward, it doesn't matter if they are right, and so on. Therefore, we find that people can discriminate. In addition, we find that people can discriminate the color diversity of the letter on the non-cued row at the same time without a cost. So what this shows, I think that there is not much debate on that while observers attend to the cue row in order to encode letters in visual working memory, as in a regular spelling task, they also are able to automatically and cost-free experience at least and extract a summary statistics of the colors outside that cue row. And that is important because it tells us that people do experience something additional. And it is possible that if we were asking them, well, what colors did you see? They would not be able, because their capacity of encoding in working memory is already exceeded. But as we are able to compress this information into a binary high-low report, they are able to extract this and report to us. So that will lead to possibly a compromise solution that comes from an article by Mike Cohen, Dennett, and Kanvisher, which support an impoverished view of consciousness. And in one of their previous papers, so here you have a view, an actual scene. You see these 2 dogs, and the person is focusing, the attention is focused on the left dog. And if, according to a really strict impoverished view, what I would experience at that moment will be something like that. Now they say, no, it's not so severe. What you experience is rather something like that. And what happens on the non-attended part is some kind of blurriness with statistical features, statistical summary features. So here we have 2 interpretations. One interpretation of the results that I just presented, the overflow representation, I would call it a mild overflow, is that those summary statistics that we can extract and report are grounded on a transient and fragile experience of the color elements. Again, it will be an open question whether those elements of colors, do they reach the global workspace, or maybe it's a partial trajectory which doesn't actually reach it but only gets into a bit. But we have the sparse view, according to which there is actually no experience whatsoever of the specific colors. They are only unconscious. People didn't see any colors. And somehow, magically, from unconscious, there is a computation of color diversity, an unconscious computation of color diversity. So what I will try to argue is that this view of unconscious computation of color diversity is not very plausible, and I will do it in several ways. One, I will examine the question if one can experience a relation, because color diversity is a relation between elements, without experiencing anything about the relata. I will make some discussion about the precision and consciousness, and that will relate to the task that I just shown, arguing that in order to perform the task, this color diversity task, what one needs is to have differentiated representation of the colors outside attentional focus. And then I will show some new results also from RSVP, and if there will be time, I might mention something on irrelevant blindness. So let me start. How can we understand generic color diversity? I mean, it is easy to understand it for letters. I see letter-like shapes. But what does it mean to see high color diversity or low color diversity without seeing colors? So it seems a bit like saying, let's reduce it to only two elements, two objects, two patches. I see these two letters having the same or different colors, but I don't see anything about their specific colors. This sounds to us as being a bit fundamentally a radical departure from the phenomenology. Because why is this a visual experience of colors? Why is this not just a guess? And usually when we experience a composite of colors, it is a function of the elements. But that is a philosophical discussion which we developed with Hila Jacobson, who is a philosopher. And let me go to some experimental tests which try to look at, probe this question in a bit in particular. So in this test, what we did, we wanted to see, we looked here in this experiment and only two elements. We started with two letters. We present two letters. The letters could be X, O, or T. There could be two identical letters or two mixed XO, XT, and so on. And people are given two tasks. The tasks are the following. In one case, I mean, the letters are presented. There is an interval which is variable, and then there is a mask. And what we want to see is to use different intervals that will interpolate between chance performance to perfect performance. And the two tasks are making a judgment if the letters are the same or different, as opposed to just what letters did you see. And the question was, will there be any SOA, any interval at which people will be, let's say, at chance at reporting the letters, but they will be better, they will be higher than chance at same different. And if that was the case, it will support the idea that sometime I can unconsciously make a same different judgment. And here is the data which is reported, corrected for guessing for the two tasks. And you see with blue, same different, and with red, which letter, and if at all, it's the other way around. And that is broken by ISI, interstimulus interval. Here it's broken by visibility rating. And we also did a modeling exercise, a simple signal detection model, in which we assume that we have three detectors, X, O, T, at each side of the display. And we model the displacement based on the ISI for the which letter. And from this, we can predict performance for same different, and it's exactly what we find. So basically, there is nothing in same different that doesn't come from the detectors which identify the letters. And we did exactly the same thing with colors. And again, now we have a race, either two colors, two colors, single color, and then there is a mask which contains like a pinwheel of colors, and it's the same kind of experimental design. And again, there is nothing higher in saying there was one color or two colors. Same different is not in any way better than just reporting the colors. So that was an argument that it is hard to experience a summary statistic, a really simple summary statistic like these two colors or those two letters are the same or not without knowing them. Again, I speak about this particular example. I don't speak about other relationship like motion, which I think it's a different case, and I can answer about that at the end. Now what I want to do is to look at a proposal, a neural proposal about the relationship of conscious and unconscious, which I want to suggest. It's not novel, but it exists in the literature. The idea that I will propose now, and that's how I would like to interpret the results, is let's take the example of colors, and we want to have a model of color detection. So let's say we have this color wheel, and now we have color detectors. We think about these color detectors as broadly tuned for color, and those will be the detectors. Let's say red. There is a red detector, there is a blue detector, cyan detector. You see them here. And the difference between conscious and unconscious perception, according to this scheme, will reflect in how differentiated their responses are. So the solid line here will correspond to conscious perception of responses of these detectors under conscious perception. The dotted low lines correspond to the responses of the same detectors, maybe somewhere in some high visual areas, which specialize to this property. They still respond, but they are less differentiated, less activated, less differentiated, and it is kind of consistent with ideas of recurrent connectivity playing a role in consciousness, because recurrent connections can enhance. In fact, Heinz von Polinsky had such a model in which the recurrent connections can enhance the tuning of detectors. So, I mean, that is also consistent with the idea, and that's from an article by Stan and J. King, that discrimination performance is typically better on seen than on unseen trials, even when the physical stimuli are physically identical. Now, why do I propose this? Because we carried out, using this model, a signal detection ideal observer analysis for performance on our task. So let's take those detectors and now degrade the detectors. We can think of the degradation as coming or from some kind of masking or from inattention. Maybe the person is not attending to the elements, and therefore those colors are at a low precision in consciousness. And as a result, that's a parameter that we see on the x-axis. That is a degradation parameter. So if we have increased the degradation, let's say we reach a large degradation of about plus minus 60 degrees on this color wheel, we end up with a situation where performance in a just single element discrimination task will be very low. And now we can do two things. We can predict for it what will be the population averaging. Let's say I present you with multiple elements, and you have to say what's the average. Average can be recovered very well, because when you sum over multiple elements, each of them noisy, you can recover a very good estimate. But the interesting thing is that what we measure is something more like variance, not like the average. And variance, unlike the average, is very sensitive to variations. So if we do this, we obtain a chance level performance in, and that is signal detection, like ideal observer, really chance level. In order to obtain a performance similar to what we had in our experiment, we need to assume that the degradation at the single element is quite low. So basically, our estimation is that people need to distinguish the elements that they don't attend in the periphery at a quite, maybe not perfect, maybe not same resolution as what they attend, but good enough so they can distinguish between red and yellow or red and orange. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to carry out this task. So, some interim conclusions. Outside focal attention and while encoding letters in the visual working memory, like in a spelling task, one can experience color diversity of elements on non-cued rows. To do this, the colors of those elements need to be represented in a differentiated way. And now the questions are, if are differentiated neural representations in high perceptual areas necessary or sufficient for consciousness? Now, probably all of us will agree that they are necessary. I think that not all of us will agree they are sufficient. So, if I understand well, or the global workspace theory, maybe the answer will be no, because in addition to having this high precise activation in, let's say, high visual areas, one also needs to engage the global workspace. And, but according to a local ignition theory, which I understand that Rafi believes it's viable, it might be. And now we also might want to ask if attention or working memory are themselves necessary for consciousness. So there is always the example of change blindness that is given to support why without attention there is no awareness. But again, there are easy answers for change blindness. I think Victor was always suggesting that it's not surprising because this visual short-term memory is fragile, so a new display can erase it. And what I believe it is important is not to confuse attention with conscious access, because they are not the same. Rather, based on all we know in psychology, attention should be conceptualized as a priority filter to conscious access. But we know for phenomena like the cocktail party phenomenon that sometimes things reach our attention when reach our consciousness when attention is focused on something else, and then attention is attracted to it, but it's not the other way around. And I want now in the last 5 minutes to show a bit of new data, one based on RSVP, and the other one, I don't know if I will have time to it, but I want to use this paradigm as an alternative to Sperling. And you probably all know the RSVP. I mean, when you see, I will show a brief demonstration. You see a very brief sequence. In this case, I will use numbers. You will see a sequence of digits. And you will see, you have the experience that you saw them. You see the numbers. But we usually in RSVP, if at the end of the sequence I will ask you what are the numbers, you will have a difficulty to report them. So at least what I might say here, you have some temporal access, but not a robust access. You cannot report them at the end. And the question is, if this kind of temporal, transient access, does it mean, is it conscious? Or maybe it's not. But what we don't have here, we don't provide people a target. Like you don't look for the letter 5 or for the digit 5. Rather, you just look and try to see what you experience. So here is the demo. Okay, I think you might have seen the letters, but if I will ask you what you saw, it will be difficult to report. And what we do instead, we ask people just estimate the average. So again, we try to extract a summary statistic out of it. People will not be able to encoding things in working memory is costly. We can maybe encode 2 items, I would say in this case. But we can extract a summary statistic, and people are using this scale to say, okay, it was about 7, about 2. And here are some results that we have now. It's a preliminary data. And what we show here is RMSD, the deviation between what the people report as the average and the real average in units of the standard deviation of the actual sequence. And what we have on the x-axis is the speed of presentation. So that is 250 milliseconds per item, 150, 150. And what you see first is performance is about the same. Okay, we did this in a way that we did blocks, and we started with 250, then we moved to 150, then to 100, and then to 50. So 50 has an advantage of more practice. But I think it is still quite remarkable that people could maintain this high performance kind of constant for a rate of 20 per second. The second thing, we can make an estimation of how many, let's say that you saw 1 item. If you saw 1 item, your RMSD should be 1, because that's the standard deviation of the samples. If you saw 2 items, you should be at this performance. If you saw 3 items, you should be here, 4 items here, and 5 items here. And we see that majority of people, out of these 12 items, they seem, even if they were, they reach a performance that they saw quite a lot of them. So, I mean, they don't have to encode. The trick is they don't have to encode in working memory. Encoding in working memory is costly, but extracting the summary statistic is somehow easier. Okay, so how much I have? 5 minutes? Minus 2? Okay, just I will wrap it up. Okay, let me skip this one. And okay, so let me end up with some parsimony considerations. Probably a strong reason why people are reluctant to accept something like an overflow view or distinction between phenomenal and accent consciousness, because it's kind of saying, okay, we already have a distinction between conscious and unconscious. Why now bring something, a third category in the story? I mean, Occam's razor, let's have as simple as possible. That's fair, but that's not what I am proposing. And what the taxonomy I am proposing is more something like that. There is just a continuum from unconscious to conscious. I don't say it's a linear. There might be some non-linearity in this continuum. And it is described by precision, the precision of differentiation, precision of the neural representations. On top of that, independent of that, there is encoding into working memory, which, if it exists in addition to precise activations, then we have phenomenal and access. But if we have no encoding, or let's say a partial trace into the global workspace, which doesn't have robust maintenance in working memory, then, but it still has precise activation in the perceptual areas, then it will be a case of phenomenal without access, which I say would happen in RSVP or in the Sperling experiments. So yes, and I think that in this kind of conceptualization, I would propose to think of access consciousness as categorical and durable, while phenomenal consciousness as analog and transient. And this conclusion, the modest overflow view, I would say that outside focal attention, we have visual experiences at lower spatial resolution and transient, at least for simple visual elements like color. Attention might enhance conscious precision, but is not necessary for conscious experience. Outside focal attention, we have vision of elements, and that vision, which is a conscious vision, it grounds the experience of the summary statistics. And while we cannot really demonstrate consciousness for non-reported single elements, this story that I put up is consistent with phenomenology, and at least with a number of self-consistent NCC theories like local ignition, recurrent processing, and integrated information. So thanks to my collaborators, Zohar Bronfman, Hila Jacobson, who is a philosopher, and she really helped us into all our investigation, and all the other students. Those are some papers, and in which some of these arguments that I put up are described in much more detail. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So I wondered, what is the subjective experience we're asking about? As philosophers, as scientists, or as a layman, we can ask about the phenomenon. Like, can we ask about the phenomenon if we don't have an access to this phenomenon? For example, was the color diversity the experience, or just an aspect of the experience?
If I understand the question, you are saying that does it make sense to speak about an experience without any access? Is that right? What I'm saying is I'm trying to provide here some kind of middle ground. I'm saying, well, perhaps there is temporary access, non-robust access. So this distinction is maybe what we do have here is very fragile access. So for a while, I know that this color is red, but it's gone so fast, or maybe I know this is a J, but it's gone so fast and it decays, and it's so fragile that I am not able to report it anymore. Or in RSVP, you see the letters, but you cannot, call it transient access. Does that help?
Hi. Thanks for the great talk. I have two questions. One, maybe related to this one, is is this related in any way to déjà vu, maybe? And another one is, so the conscious representations, you can easily think of what their use is. What do you think the undifferentiated, unconscious representations? I was thinking maybe it gives you some kind of help in making decisions, because it gives you like, oh, this situation is like some other situation, and I know what to do in that one, so this would help me in the new situation.
Well, that's an interesting and difficult question. I would say, well, let me start from, in fact, taking a really strong view on the other side. Probably if I would represent net block, I would say phenomenal experience doesn't have to have a function. It's there for you to have pleasure, maybe. I don't know. But, I wouldn't deny that they might have a function. And the question is whether they can generate déjà vu or they might help us in making decision, it a bit depends on whether they can leave a trace in some kind of memory. So perhaps something which I phenomenally experienced must be then maintained in memory maybe more effectively than something which was purely unconscious. So maybe some of the, I don't know, I mean, but you could say the same with unconscious processing. Maybe you see something you don't see. Something is totally unconscious and somehow affects us. So I would say in this case, I don't know. Maybe something which is phenomenally experienced, what I assume in this model is that something which is phenomenally experienced, it generates enough sharp activation in the visual brain areas, the relevant ones. Maybe it will be more effective to, let's say you see a really scary, unpleasant thing, and it's you suppress it immediately. So you don't get it into your global workspace or in working memory. Maybe it will be quite effective for later on when you show me to make a decision for me to go away from it. I don't know.
Hi. So couple of related question comments. The first is that I believe Jeremy Wolf has some nice data showing that if you test for partial knowledge, you can get knowledge of up to 10 items. Now, this is nice, but it's still just a part of a display of 30 items. So it might be that you have more awareness than just 3 items, but still it's limited and fragile. And just as data that supports at least some of what you showed us, I think this works well. But I was actually wondering if you'd care to try and comment or combine what you showed with data and theory that was presented on Tuesday about how awareness might not be a point estimate, but a distribution.
Yeah, I mean, okay, let me start from the second, because with regard to working memory, I mean, I am more familiar with the capacity of 3-4 items, which is quite robust in visual working memory and in verbal memory. But yes, I don't know. Maybe there are more robust ways of looking at it, which I'm not enough familiar. But with regard to, what was it? The distribution. Yes, I fully support this, because exactly what I was saying is that those distributions, I mean, what I think that happens, let me go to this picture. Yes, I mean, what I think is that when you have something in consciousness, there is some kind of tuning. And if it's very focused, then you have clear feelings, yes, that's red. But if it is somewhere like that, you might say, oh, it's reddish. So your experience, I do believe that our experience has precision with it. It's not only, yes, so it's reddish, but I'm not sure. It could be between orange and yellow, or something like that. So I think you can characterize, it's a property of visual experience to have some kind of probabilistic information weighted and so on. I would, yes, accept this.
Hi, I think I have a very simple question. Why spirulent paradigm is a test of consciousness in this sense rather than a working member or something? I believe if you present 8 letters, 9 letters, whatever, to the participant without withdraw the stimulus, we have this kind of phenomenon feeling that we all consistently experiences it.
I couldn't, can you repeat this? Because maybe I couldn't.
Sorry, so why spirulent paradigm is a paradigm to study consciousness rather than memory?
It's a theory of?
It's the paradigm to study consciousness rather than memory.
Of consciousness rather than memory?
Yeah.
Okay.
Why? Because it seems to me like all you're talking about is a property of working memory.
Well, the Sperling is probing memory. I agree. But he showed there some things. He showed that we have access to more information than we report. Okay? Because there's a difference between whole report and queued recalled. And that is a detail I didn't have to go into here. And he showed that while you can report, so your working memory can report for you 3-4 items, 3 usually, you have access to much more. And the question which is left open, do you see those more items or they are purely unconsciously registered? That's a follow-up question. He didn't, I mean, he speculated on it, but he didn't answer it.
Yeah. Is there an alternative interpretation that is related to Gestalt kind of theory? So you can argue that there are two things that are happening when you are seeing this array with the colors and with the numbers. That there is a kind of Gestalt perception of the whole thing, which is accessible, and at the same time you are asking the people to focus attention on something, and you are employing an additional kind of system that is of attention that your question is directing them for. So there are really two things, and both of them are in fact reportable.
Yes, so I mean, in some way, Gestalt is might be involved when I have to make a judgment of same or different. And that's why I was looking at those cases. But again, I would argue that what happened when you, let's say, see a Gestalt of rows and columns, or let's say you see circles organized in, and you see them as rows or as columns, that you do, this Gestalt is not coming without being grounded in the perception of the elements. You do see the elements, and that triggers the Gestalt. The question whether you can have purely unconscious, you can have a Gestalt without seeing the elements, that I guess will be the question.
Thank you very much, Mark. Coffee break, and we are here at 11.